Tamara, here we are with round two of talking about ADHD. And I'm so glad
Yeah.
that you came back on the Fempower Health podcast. Your first book, first, just tell us, like, I saw there's like 1,000 reviews on Amazon. So you must have had so many people reading it and writing to you about Your Brain's Not Broken. I know I referred many to read your first book.
Well, thank you.
And it's so great to see that you have a follow-up where we're now talking about family dynamics. So for those who are on YouTube, here's the book. Fabulous book. I really enjoyed reading it. So tell me what this journey has been like, and then we'll talk about these family dynamics.
Yeah. So when you and I talked, now we figured out it's 2 years ago. Your Brain's Not Broken just came out.
Yep.
And I'll be really honest, I just hoped it would sell 5,000 copies just so I could go, yep, I did it. It's like you running a marathon. Yep, I did it. I'm done. Well, the book has gone on to sell 65,000 copies.
Amazing.
And I try not to let that freak me out as I was writing the next book, because I'm like, so people are going to read it. I might want to be better when I write this next book. I don't know. But I'm humbled by it because it's a simple book, the first book, but I'm humbled because a lot of people saw themselves in it and they're like, thank you for seeing the emotional side of ADHD.
Yep.
And so that's very humbling because it's a simple book. I didn't break new ground. I wasn't trying to shake up the world. The whole goal of the book was to go, I see you. You're okay. I see you. And to kind of help people see themselves. So it's going great and I'm grateful. So, but to be honest, when I was starting to write the next book, You, Me, and Our ADHD Family, I'm not going to lie, it got into my head. Like now I have to do it again. And I have to make this one better.
Yeah, no, I can imagine the pressure. Now, for those who haven't had the privilege of reading this book and are just learning about your work, why don't you tell us your background and why you've decided to write about ADHD?
Yeah. Well, I have an ADHD resume. So I started out as a high school teacher. Then I moved to being a college professor. I taught educational psychology and statistics. Then I moved into administration in higher ed. And then done with all of that. And so I started to be an ADHD coach. And I ended up opening up the ADHD Center of West Michigan. And so I hired coaches, therapists, a speech language pathologist. I'm hiring the first person who can actually medicate those with ADHD. So I have this incredible team now that I lead. They are amazing and they're gifted. And the whole dream of the center was, I want a place for people to come where they feel accepted and they feel the hospitality. We're not perfect. We get complaints that our website's too complicated. We're working on it. But I want them to feel kindness and hospitality the second they're either in our doors or somehow in the ADHD system.
It's wonderful.
So that's my story. Yeah. And I
That's
decided to
wonderful.
write a book because I was working with clients who they were coming to me thinking they were broken. And they were coming to me just distraught, full of shame, full of all kinds of ADHD emotions they didn't understand that they were using.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept saying, your brain's not broken. It's just different. And so the first book kind of came out of me just writing kind of a love letter to all those people I'll never meet, going, you're okay. You're just different. Let's figure out that difference.
No, absolutely.
I know that sounds awfully mushy, but it's really the intent I had.
No, and it's very clear because it's quite even though you may have come from a place of feeling mushy, as you just said, it really is such a fact-based and practical approach to better understanding how your brain works. And so, it makes a lot of sense that your follow-up would be to talk about the family dynamics. And so it's really interesting to read, this next level book.
Yeah.
And I'd love to dive into some of the things that that so we can talk about the book and help people understand all the great things that you've written in it.
Oh, thank you. Yes, let's do it.
So, first I want to start with a really I was trying to find the quote because I thought I'd highlighted it and I can't find it. So maybe it was just a theme, but I felt like there was one point where you were coaching a family dynamic and it seemed like they came into you like pointing fingers and at the child. I think it was pointing a finger at the child, like, help me with this problem.
Yeah,
And, it was very clear that because ADHD runs in families, multiple people are going to have it. And it's not managing that other, it's really the dynamic. And it was just the way you wrote that particular section. It was just so funny because I think we go to therapy and it's like, fix that other person. And then you realize
right.
it's the dynamic and you have to also look in the mirror. I guess that's kind of a place to start and maybe why you wrote this book. So please do comment.
So ADHD runs in families, as you said, and there's one ADHD family member, there's going to be more. If there's a biological connection, there's going to be more. And so ADHD has these certain characteristics, and one of them is high emotional volatility. And when you have one emotional person in the family, you're going to have others. And then this keeps causing like rippling effect back and forth, back and forth. And so people start playing these roles or people start walking on eggshells or, whatever. So after I wrote Your Brain's Not Broken, I'm like, well, now we need a system for understanding what's happens in this thing we call a family. And I work with so many incredible people who their family's like, I hate my family. And then the next minute, I love my family. And they're like, no, I'm pretty sure I hate my family. And so I wanted to give them a way to look at their families and understand what was happening. And
Right.
it's so often people come to me and go, he's the problem, fix him.
Yeah.
Like, is he?
Your book, what was interesting to me is reading it, I'm like, this is kind of a self-help book for all families. Like just some of the analogies you gave about dealing with
Yeah.
emotions and managing emotions. And I thought it was so helpful. But what also struck me is someone who may not fully understand ADHD,
Yeah.
when reading these very practical examples, could someone even say, aren't you just trying to blame everything on ADHD and using it as a crutch? And, generally, I feel like in our society, it's still misunderstood, even
Yeah.
possibly from a gender perspective. So,
Right.
someone gave me an example within their family on how the son definitely doesn't have ADHD. And the school system is like, well, you must have ADHD, and that's why this is a problem. But then the daughter definitely has it, is being managed. Everyone in the family is getting the proper support system. And the school wants to say that she just doesn't want to do her work. And so,
Yep.
even with the understanding of outside of the family, just all these complications that people have to
Right.
deal with. So talk to me about, I think we just have to lay down this foundation of believing it and not using it as an excuse to get away with behaviors and how that even impacts
Yeah.
dynamics.
All right. I love this question because, first of all, let's just go over some basic symptoms of ADHD, right? We have short term memory issues, those are real. Okay. We have working memory issues. Working memory is like us having a whiteboard that we jot things down on that we return back to. Well, we don't have a great whiteboard system. Okay. And those are part of the executive functions that don't work as well with ADHD. So that's real. Okay. I know adults who never memorize their multiplication tables because memorization is part of that short term and working memory. So we have that. Then we have the emotional regulation, right? So a lot of people with ADHD don't know what to do, how to do it, or when to do it. Now, this is interpreted differently in society. So boys are more apt to be diagnosed with ADHD. And I don't know if you've ever seen a teen boy, but they're squirrely, right? And so just because someone's squirrely doesn't mean they have short-term deficits, doesn't mean they have emotional dysregulation. It means they probably have a lot of testosterone bursting through their bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Women tend to go underdiagnosed. And if you're an intelligent female, it's very difficult to get an accurate diagnosis because you've gotten good at covering up, accounting for, and masking all of your symptoms.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say you have a female in school and she's like, I don't think I can do this. She is more apt, she says, I think I have ADHD. She's more apt for people to go, no, honey, you have anxiety. By the way, a lot of people with ADHD use anxiety as right? As a motivational tool.
Right.
But they don't say that to the boys. Okay. To the girls, they're like, well, what if you get more organized? And to the boys, they're like, how about you get some medication? So how we skew ADHD is still really rough. And again, if you're a high functioning, high intelligence female, people just expect you to hold it together. And this is what I'm seeing a lot of females struggle with.
Interesting.
People don't believe them. So now let's take it turning in homework. Okay. A boy doesn't turn in homework. Hey, he probably has ADHD. Well, maybe not. We don't know.
Right.
Right. Same girl doesn't turn in her homework. Well, why aren't you organized enough? I mean, it's a perception issue, right? So we really have to be careful. We tend to overdiagnose boys and underdiagnose women or girls.
Okay. Okay.
So I see this over and over again. Your question was also like, do you think people can use it as a crutch or, can I just blame all that's wrong with me on my ADHD?
Right.
Yes, that happens. And unfortunately, it does happen. So something that I want to teach people is know your ADHD symptoms, take
Mhm.
responsibility for them. And when you make a mistake due to the ADHD symptoms, own it and try to fix it. You're right. I forgot to do that, or I misunderstood. I got confused. I will make it right by doing this. And so that's teaching responsibility for your ADHD.
Okay. No, that's very fair. Now, here's a question since we're on the topic of the gender is what about a woman is going through her different life stages? Now, this wasn't specifically covered in the book, but I know even since you and I spoke, I've spoken to experts where, like, once you reach perimenopause and you've got all those hormone fluctuations, any mental health symptoms you already have get exacerbated. Any that
Yep.
you don't necessarily have, you may have like newish ones because of the hormone changes. Speaking of hormone changes, pregnancy. So there's all these life changes too
Right.
that probably have an impact on, you know, your ability to figure out how to take responsibility because there's now you're a new mom if you've had the pregnancy. In perimenopause, it's you are managing a big career, perhaps multiple children, perhaps kids going to college. And so it's like this whole thing that you just described with the female dynamics of ADHD is probably blown up. I mean, I'm curious what you're seeing in your
Oh,
practice.
it is blown up. Here's the thing. We're finding out in this is not ADHD research, but just hormonal research. Hormones affect the brain. Now, any woman listening who's ever had PMS or pregnancy or menopause went, well, yeah, we didn't need research for that. But what they're really saying is it affects the brain so much that the brain shrinks. So during pregnancy, a woman's brain shrinks. During menopause, a woman's brain shrinks, loses volume. Okay, don't worry, guys, it comes back. It doesn't feel like it, but it does. During that, any ADHD signs become exacerbated, like you said. But now, if you have a female who's fluctuating throughout the month, her medication may not be working the same each week.
Right.
And there's calls for research, and that we're just at the beginning of this to diagnose women effectively, but then to treat them effectively and to treat them like they're women and not like they're men.
Okay.
So the fluctuations in females, any female listening will go, oh yeah, I know what she's talking about. They're all over the place. To have plans on how to treat a female's ADHD a little bit more precisely
Yep.
and have them have more options. When progesterone, I can't even talk today now, takes a dive, we start to think and feel differently. When estrogen rises, we start to think and feel differently. So often we need the ADHD medication to follow those rise and falls.
Yep. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. So now that we understand, because my target audience is female listeners, and I think it was really important I wanted to make sure we laid that foundation of this dynamic that we now know.
Yes,
Okay,
I love it.
ADHD symptoms are real. This male versus female dynamic, you're not crazy. It
Right.
does happen, and yes, it changes over the course of our lifetime. So
Yeah.
now we come to the dynamics. And I will say the core of what I'm reading in your book is we all have to both take ownership of our role in the dynamic and then figure out how we all work together to manage the quirks of our own ADHD. Is that a fair?
It is. So now we're going to start to get into the dynamics, though, because a lot of times women have ADHD in the families. And a lot of times women marry men with ADHD. But guess between the two of them, who runs the house?
The women?
Yes. And now we're getting to a point where literally the female is saying, I can't do this anymore. This is too hard on me. I'm writing checks my body isn't cashing. You've got to step up and help me. And I work with a lot of couples like this. The husband's like, well, sure, I'll help you however I can. And the wife's like, no, 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 no. It's not help. Equal partnership. I need you to be partner. And he's like, cool, just teach me how, because I've never done it before. And again, this goes back to how society views male ADHD and female ADHD. Men tend to get off a little bit easier in society having ADHD. Women are just expected to hold it together, right? So that's the first dynamic that I see popping up is the ADHD spouse is going, I don't want to babysit you anymore. I need you to be a partner. Now let's take the situation where if we're not dealing with the whole family yet, just two people, because it gets complicated quickly, right?
Yes, absolutely.
The one person has ADHD, the other person doesn't. Whew, whole bunch of dynamics can happen there, right? Because the ADHD person's like, okay, I'm trying. I want to show up for this person. I love this person. I keep failing, but I'm going to keep showing up. And sometimes the ADHD person or the non-ADHD person can be gracious. And other times they could go, what's wrong with you? Why do you keep screwing up? Now I'm just resentful and angry about this. So those are some of the dynamics just between couples that pop up. And then those couples have children. And so then this keeps multiplying, right? And sometimes in families, we end up with the haves and have-nots.
Okay.
And they kind of take sides.
Oh,
Okay, let's take a
goodness.
family of four. A dad has ADHD, daughter has ADHD. Okay, so they kind of get each other and they kind of stick up for each other. Well, she didn't
Okay.
take out the trash because of this, and they're covering for each other. And the two neurotypical people just silently roll their eyes like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired of this. Right? Can you see that happening in families?
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we try to do is kind of break down the haves and have-nots and try
Okay.
to make it so that everyone works together to take responsibility for themselves.
How would you say that this is different from, okay, this is just how humans are supposed to be together? Like there's just this nuance with ADHD that I want to make sure that we capture because it is true. Like, we get, I will say this. So I have, well, at the moment it's ADHD like symptoms. We're going to be doing some further testing to see if I have full on ADHD. I don't know if the nuances will matter and what that means for treatment. But I think part of me is also like, because I probably have it, I don't know the difference, but family dynamics are family dynamics. So why does the added layer of ADHD make things that much more complicated?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. Boy, does it make it more complicated. So I hate talking about this, but it's important, and the whole book's about this. Those of us with ADHD, we're quirky. We have communication quirks that we don't even understand all the time. We tend to be a bit more emotional. So if you tell me something and I'm like, no, it's not, I could have just went, no, that I don't think that's accurate. Instead, I respond with a full bit, right? I have different logic that I use as an ADHD person from a neurotypical person. And all these things affect relationships. And in families, this should be the safest place. And yet, research tells us that when there's ADHD present in a family, it's likely to be an unsafe place. We have higher incidences of alcoholism, child abuse, child neglect, you name it, it's there.
Okay.
And even child obesity is greater when you have ADHD. So the general rule is what neurotypical people have more of, ADHD people have less of. More patience, money, marital happiness.
Okay.
What ADHD people have more of, neurotypical people will have less of.
Okay.
Diabetes, cardiovascular disease, fights in the family, like high volatility. It's really the disparity between the two. We really need to start looking at it.
Okay.
And if we really took ADHD seriously, we would start to see what a true threat it is for people, and that living with it is actually quite difficult. So now bringing all of that back to the family,
Yep.
we can be hot little bundles of mess. We're delightful too, by the way. We're
Yes.
absolutely delightful as a people, but we could be a mess.
Yes.
And we can easily get rattled. We forget things. And then we could just be like, oh, I'm so mad at myself. And then we could go down the shame spiral. A family member may try to help us and go, oh, no, you're fine. You're okay. Right. And we're like, no. And then we're mad at them for trying to help us. Can you see all that happening in
Oh,
families?
yes. Absolutely.
It gets so complicated so quickly.
Absolutely. Which I think is even more important for each of us as individuals, regardless of whether or not we have ADHD, to really keep looking at this as I own my part of self-care.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
almost so maybe the takeaway here is in the ADHD dynamic, it's even more important because
Yes.
of the big impact. Would that be
Yeah.
fair?
I love that you said it like that. That's beautiful. So part one of the book is okay, my publisher wouldn't allow me to say it like this, but part one of the book is get your shit together.
Yeah.
Just get it together. In other words, take care of yourself emotionally. Understand when you're out of the window of tolerance. Understand this. Like get it together. Okay? It doesn't mean perfection. It means I take responsibility for myself. I'm aware of how I'm impacting other people, and I take responsibility for how I impact other people. So I'm doing the work to become more aware. Part two of the book is Welcome to the Goat Rodeo, because it is a goat rodeo. And so in the rodeo is, wow, you're coming home from this all wound up, and I really want to kind of jump in and try to fix it for you. And, how do I not fix this for another person? And things like that.
Right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. And with the taking responsibility, I would say this kind of goes to what we were starting with, which is could people use ADHD as a cop out? And I think this
Yeah.
would be the antithesis of it is it can be controlled. And yes, in many cases, maybe most would need medication, even beyond the medication. I mean, there's so many things in here where you talk about the tool book. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to share maybe some of your your favorite tips, but one thing I will say is widening, what was the term? Widening your window of tolerance.
Yeah.
And to know that that is possible was so wonderful to hear. 'Cause it is hard when you have immediate reactions that are strong reactions, and you
Right.
know that after the fact, you wish you wouldn't have done that, and it sounds like, it's really possible to be in a better place, and so I think we have to start with it is that ownership of managing it as best we could, and hopefully that can help mitigate against the ADHD cop out, so to speak.
Yeah. So I want to be very clear because if your listeners have ADHD and they're listening, they could accidentally hear that we're talking about perfection.
Yes, thank you
Okay.
for saying
Uh,
that because 100% we are not talking about perfection.
right.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for
So a
emphasizing
lot of
that.
women will, yeah, a lot of women will try to counteract their ADHD with perfection. And as a recovering perfectionist myself, I understand because that's how I kept myself in line.
Yep.
That was a compensating trick that I learned. If I could just do this perfection thing, my ADHD symptoms would be managed. Okay, it's a bad idea, guys. It backfires every time. So I just want to be clear, we're not talking perfection. As Georgie, you said, we're talking about owning and self-awareness. So one of the self-awareness tools I give in the book is called the window of tolerance. Now this, I didn't make this up. This is from the 70s. So this isn't even new and sexy stuff, but it really applies to ADHD. So in the window of tolerance, you have this space where you can just act yourself. You're breathing normally, your heart rate's normal, you're not in fight or flight, you're just in this nice safe zone. Above the window of tolerance is hyperarousal. And hyperarousal is the fight or flight, or is the fight, actually, right? And below the window, all right, so if your listeners are trying to picture this, remember in the center we have the window of tolerance. You just feel great. Above it is hyper, below it is hypo. And hypo is still in the part of the brain that is fight or flight, but that's freeze, flee, or fawn. And that's where you downregulate. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. But the research suggests that people with ADHD have a very small window of tolerance. In other words, it doesn't take a lot to get us out into hyperarousal or hypo. So hyperarousal is when like I start to sweat. I'm nervous. I feel like I'm being chased by a bear, even though I'm not really, right?
Right.
And I start to think quickly. I start to react. I was working with someone who yells at people at work. She sends these horrible emails to people, tries to make people feel like crud, all that.
Okay.
So that's hypoarousal. And I'm sure if your listeners think of a teenager after school, they tend to go into hypoarousal. Just leave me alone. And you'll see them just lying on their bed scrolling through their phone. They just want to be almost like in a cocoon.
Okay.
Okay. So that's hypo. Now, the key is you want to know when you're in hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Now, there are times that I'm like, oh, how did I land in hyperarousal? Okay. All right. So I'm here. That means I have to bring myself back down to the window of tolerance. So I do activities that calm my body down, that bring myself back into that window of tolerance. Sometimes I land in hypo, and all of a sudden, like my couch has this gravity force. I'm like, I can't break this force of gravity. I don't want to move. And I get that. I tend to get that after dinner. One of my dogs might be lying on me, nice weighted blanket. I'm like, no, I should get up and clean the kitchen, but I don't see that happening because I'm hypoarousal. I just want to sit here. I haven't sat all day, right? And hypoarousal is I can just feel myself starting to shut down. In cases of hypoarousal, you have to boost up the energy to get out, to get back into the window. Those of us with ADHD, we go in and out of the window very quickly all throughout the day. And we have to be able to sense that. I have a client who came to me just today and said, I think I'm going to hypoarousal a lot and I don't even realize it. And I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, so I will be at work and all of a sudden I'm like, what about the weather this weekend? And it starts with a distraction. He turns to his phone, goes to the weather app, and then it kind of feels good. Like I don't have to deal with that email that I was going to answer. Okay, this just feels good. I'm going to stay in this down regulated state. And once he's there, he's talking about that gravitational pull. So I ask him, like, are you willing to get out of hypoarousal at that point? And he looked at me and goes, I don't know. It feels good.
That's an honest
Like,
answer.
yeah. I mean, I have honest clients, right?
Yep.
So I can't make him get out of hypoarousal. Those of you who are listening who have children who you see, you can't make them, but you can help them become aware of it.
Okay.
So I changed tactics on him. I'm like, okay, now that you're aware that you're going into hypoarousal, what's happening inside your body in hypoarousal? And so we took a different way to understand that so that he could start to go, you know what? I'm slouching. I know that I'm slouching when I'm in hypoarousal. He goes, I could just sit up straight, put my arms behind me and kind of do a quick stretch. I'm like, you're right. Even if you did that, you'd bring your awareness back up that there is such a thing as window of tolerance. How about you do that? So a lot of times when we're trying to work with ADHD, all people have window of tolerance. Neurotypical people tend to have a wider window. In other words, we don't pop up to hyperarousal just because we can't find our parked car, right? True story. It was a big parking lot in my defense, but
I get it.
But just not everyone does that. So managing your own window of tolerance is the key in starting to widen that window.
No, it's so true to have that awareness. If okay, I just have to ask this one. What if if you oscillate so much between hyper and hypo that maybe even the window of tolerance isn't even there, that you don't even notice the oscillation? How does someone even begin to unravel that?
With help from a professional,
Okay.
because that is true, and a lot of my clients do that.
Okay.
And here's why: they're running through their day, just running. It's a form of hyperarousal. Like I'm just so busy, I'm just running from one thing, emergency, to the next, or what they've told themselves, right? And then they go to be like, I can't move. I have to stay in bed all weekend, just to try to recover from the. And so the Monday they do the hyperarousal all week because they see danger everywhere. They're in bed all day Saturday. That's an example. And when my clients come in to me like that, they'll say, and I always make sure we're working with ADHD, not autism, burnout, or anything else like that. But I'm like, they don't have. What does it feel like when you're in a window of tolerance? And they'll look at it because I draw a little diagram of a window. And they'll look at it. They're, I don't know. Okay, so what would your body feel like? And they're just puzzled because they go from one or to the other. So it takes a couple sessions, and usually when I'm working with someone, they can be in the window of tolerance.
Okay.
And so I start to teach them, what does your body feel like now? Well, I'm kind of relaxed, but I'm not tired, and I can kind of pay attention. And I'm like, and look at your posture. You're kind of sitting up, you're comfy, nice and comfy in this chair. So you're relaxed and alert. Yes. Okay, that's the window of tolerance. What you're feeling is possible you could feel this more. So let's
Okay.
start to practice it.
Okay. So
That was
that's
a bit of a long
possible.
answer. I don't know if you needed that
No.
long of an answer.
No, this is perfect because, I think this is just a good example of just generally saying to people, you do have the ability to take ownership of however your ADHD manifests. And I would encourage people to read the book to understand all the different tools. There's so many different ways to dissect it, like the monkeys and the monkey brain
Yeah.
and all of these different wonderful tools and analogies that you give for people to kind of because I guess I will just say this in all these interviews I've done on the podcast, the thing that's really becoming clear, especially even in this season, is how critical it is for people to have language around what's
Yeah.
happening with them. And there are
Yes.
so many nuances. And I feel like this season I've gotten into this next level of nuance in healthcare where I'm like, wow, like there is language for all of this. And I think we just don't know it because we're not experts and we live with our body and we just think that that's just how things are. And so your book in that first half of just understanding your own part of it, you do lend so many different things to help us speak to whatever may be happening.
Yeah. By the way, I've been listening and I love what you're doing. You're doing a
Thank you.
great job.
Thank you.
So,
I really appreciate it. Thank you. So now we get to the family dynamics. So before I forget, there was a statement you made about the family dynamics in the second half of your book where it was don't go in to save the day.
yeah.
Now, I just have to make a comment because I know generally speaking in our culture, I feel like we are the helicopter parent, save the day constantly, trying to make sure all these certain things happen. I think social media doesn't help. How college
Yeah.
applications are harder than ever. There's all these like external pressures that I think are exacerbating the save the day mentality. So I just want to
Yeah.
acknowledge that part.
Yeah.
Um, but so I don't know if you want to address that or if we want to just take a step back and talk about the family dynamics piece and how we can now manage that and give people some tools.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a moment because remember how I talked about the haves and have-nots in families? A lot of times, the people who don't have ADHD, they have compassion on us. They're like, I see life is hard for her. Life is taking extra steps that I don't have to take. What if I can help her? And this comes out of such a good place. But a lot of times we we end up seeing over functioning. Overfunctioning is I'm doing something for someone else that they can do for themselves.
But
And whenever there's an overfunctioner, there's an underfunctioner because we've got to balance the world out, right? So we, as parents, we have to not overfunction for our children. As spouses, we have to not overfunction for our spouse, but we have to figure out how to let them function. Now, a little psychology of the underfunctioner. Underfunctioners are kind of professionals. They're like, hey, this underfunctioning stuff works for me. If you're going to do my laundry, make my bed, I have no reason to move out of this house. This is going great for me. I am not going to change anything. Okay? You just keep overfunctioning and I'll keep underfunctioning. And I think this is a good agreement. So there's going to be that dynamic. And overfunctioners usually have this if I don't do it, this person will fail. And so I try to shift this to a paradigm I call rescue versus mastery. So are you going to rescue someone or are you going to help them master the skill? Now, if you have smart kids with ADHD, they're the worst because they're like, I'm pretty sure I can't do it. How about you show me about 4 more times how to fold my shirt? And you're like, wait a minute, you only have 4 shirts left to fold. Yeah, but it's going to take me that long, right? They're just wicked smart. And so you just really go, how about you fold one first and I'll watch you. And once you get it, you can do it. That's mastery. Rescue is, I'll just hand it to me. I'll just do it for you.
And
Yeah.
so why would you say, so one of the things we talked about earlier is like the book has so many great things that
Right.
generally we should all incorporate. But what we're talking here specifically about is the dynamics when ADHD is involved. And so why is this mastery even more important? Like what happens and what is the impact on the individual and family dynamics when we aren't mastering this balance?
Yeah. We end up with a whole bunch of overfunctioners and a whole bunch of underfunctioners. And no one really takes the appropriate role. So at the end of the day, we have the grown-up rule. I am responsible for myself. And by the way, kids, once they reach like 10 to 12 years with only ADHD present, they can start to follow that rule too. You're responsible for yourself. If you did something that caused someone else to overfunction, then take responsibility for it. Now, a lot of times people will underfunction and not even know it. I had a couple who it was a young couple, and this guy was doing all this work around the house. He didn't have ADHD, but he was doing all this extra work. And finally, they came to me and said, I'm going nuts with this. And she looked at me and she just so sweetly, she said, I'll be honest, I never thought about how the living room stays clean. I never thought about it. And she wasn't underfunctioning on purpose in this case. She was just in her own world. She wasn't thinking about that. And so that having that kind of understanding is really important to see, like, am I holding my weight? Am I taking responsibility for what I should be taking responsibility for?
Right. And some of these quirks can come out in funny ways. I'm laughing at the example of the way one of your quirks. There's a whole list of quirks, and I was laughing. I'm like, I think I have every single one of these.
Oh, good. Good. I'm so glad because I do too.
I love them. But there was the one where you're like, well, sometimes I just make this sweeping statement. You said it more eloquently, and you were going to Home Depot to get something and come back with stuff from Lowe's, and your husband's like, what? And so now when you leave, he's like, are you going to blue or orange today? And now it just becomes this like funny thing in the family rather than this fight of why didn't you go to the place you said you were going? I was trying to call you and couldn't find you, blah, blah, blah. Right. So there can be funny things that come out of these quirks.
I could actually, these communication quirks that I write about can actually be fights unless we really take time and just understand. For so many years, my husband didn't understand. I just speak in genres. I'm going to any big box store that I see first and getting a screwdriver. That's what I need. I don't care where. It doesn't even have to be a big, whoever is carrying this. So I'm just going to say the first thing that pops in my head, I'm going to Home Depot. And then he's like, I thought you were going to Home Depot. I'm like, why do you care? Like, I got a screwdriver. That's what I needed. Do you see how that little communication quirk just kind of comes up? And so here's one that I learned about while writing the book.
Okay.
And I don't know if you remember it. So my husband and I was actually in the middle of writing this chapter. My husband comes up to me and we're talking about something that was going to happen in the weekend.
Okay.
All of a sudden he looks at me, tilts his head, walks away. I'm in mid-sentence.
Oh, yes.
Walks away.
Yep.
It doesn't come back. And I looked at my daughter and said, he just walked away from me. And she looked at me, she goes, you both do that. And I'm like, surely I don't. I'm so aware. I'm so self-aware, surely. And she's like, no, you do. And later on, as I said in the book, I checked in with him. I said, hey, what was going on there? So instead of assuming he's a big fat jerk who is out to get me, I'm like, help me understand what was going on there. He's like, I have no recollection of that. He goes, oh, I think I left the pool pump on and I had to make sure to turn it off. And so if I took it personally, a fight could start.
Yeah.
Because I could look like, wow, you don't even care enough about me to finish the sentence.
Right.
Right. We look like
yeah. No, I get it. And, like, again, at the beginning of the book, it's take ownership. But then I think the second half of the book, it almost is like learning the different tools to, at the end of the day, maybe negotiate's too strong of a word, but have a discussion on how do we navigate this together.
Right.
Just like you gave a great example of something so simple, you, instead of making an assumption, you both talked about it. And, there's definitely way more complicated things that will likely happen, but that simple example can show how even something simple can get into a massive fight. Imagine the complicated things. And that's why this ownership and the communication and the dynamics are so critical in managing this. And And I love that you wrote this book to talk about the systemic impact rather than just educating on what ADHD is. And the just is probably not a fair word because your first book was more than a just, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
It's more than the one person. It is truly the dynamic.
Yeah, it is the dynamic, but the irony is we love these people. And these are the people, and by the way, I just want your listeners to know I confess a lot of my dirty laundry. And it's not a tell all. I'm just saying I confess to being a jerk in the book. So I'm not talking about perfectionism. I don't put myself on a pedestal. I screw up on a regular basis. It's just I try to catch it. And if I catch it, I try to apologize for it. Going, hey, that I was a bit pokey about that. And I really want you to know that's not what I intended. I was actually trying to do something else while answering you. That's not how I want to be to you.
Right.
It just kind of owning our space on that. But
Yeah.
being in families affected by ADHD, I think the key word here is grace.
Yeah.
We've got to give each other, if we love each other, we've got to see each other with really gracious glasses on. And so we
Yep.
want to see each other and go, I hope for the best in you. And I know home is safe and I'm not always going to see the best of you because you showed it. You went out into the big world and you showed the world your best self. Now you're coming home,
Yeah.
but I know that the best is out there.
Yep.
And
No,
so it
absolutely.
doesn't mean we don't have boundaries. It doesn't mean we just accept whatever rubbish people throw at us, but it does mean that we look and we hope for the best in the people we love.
No, absolutely. And thank you for saying that. And I will, just as a friendly reminder for those listening with the different stages of life, especially because I know perimenopause and menopause are being discussed so much, and
Yeah.
there's still so much to catch up on. Because for quick background, for those who haven't listened to those episodes, 20 years ago, the Women's Health Initiative study was, if I may so bluntly say, not properly analyzed, and it completely transformed for the past 20 years how women in this stage of life have been treated. And we also know now ADHD is much more recognized in women than it has been. And so that's just an added layer that I think we have to
Yeah.
work through. And so, it's not as simple as I have ADHD or I don't, but there's life, there's families, there's people who have it, people who don't. And that whole dynamic creates the complication.
Yes.
Um, and I think we all have to play our part in taking care of ourselves and having the right support system around us. Because these days, man, life is not always easy, but there's great resources like you and your book, and many people who are doing podcasts and experts on social media sharing their wisdom. And we've got these great tools in our toolkit. So yeah.
I love that you said that because I don't want people to suffer alone.
Yeah.
I want people to to work with professionals who can help them. But I also want to create homes where it's safe. It's safe not to be your best self. It's good to take responsibility, but just to know like I can't be my best self all the time.
Yeah.
In the book I talk about I'll be a grown up all day. I'll listen to my clients. I'll ask good questions. I'll have great boundaries. I'm doing all the grown up stuff. And I come through the door and my husband's like, hey, I have an idea. And I catch myself saying before I can think, well, that's stupid. Right? Like, I would not say that outside of my house. And yet I walk inside and I'm like, well, that's a dumb idea. Let's not do that. And so I have to catch myself and going, you know what? That's not my best. I want you to know you do deserve my best. And so our family does deserve our best, and yet we don't always give our best to our family. We want to have both. We want to try to show our best to our family, but also understand it's a safe place not to be. So we want
Yep.
to create that safety at home.
No, that's fair. And again, taking responsibility, working on that window of tolerance, and then working on the family dynamics, and just, you know,
Yeah.
it's not there's no end game. It's always a work in progress. And I just love the tools that you shared, and the examples, and for also being open. I know you said vulnerability is not your favorite thing. I chuckled at that, by the way. But, I do feel like you were quite vulnerable in the book. And just really appreciate you being so dedicated um, to those with ADHD and making sure that we live the best life we can and not be perfect, but live the best life we
Right.
can.
Right. So let's just hit on the bright side a second of ADHD. ADHD comes with a lot of baggage. Okay.
Yeah.
And we've mentioned them. I've said it's hard to be us. Okay. So I want to be clear. I'm not minimizing that. ADHD is not a superpower. Okay. If it were a superpower, I wouldn't feel crappy all these times. Right. However, as a whole, we're kind of hilarious people. I don't know about you, but all of my clients, they have this like ability to kind of turn a phrase in a funny way. They have an ability to see things differently and to laugh at that.
Yes.
That is really kind of cool.
Yes.
The other thing is aging mentally. We tend to age different mentally. We forget how old we are. I made a joke when I first came on because I'm used to seeing Zoom, my nice cleaned up, let's get rid of blemishes kind of look. And I look like, whoa, who's the old lady on the screen? It is because my ADHD brain's like, oh, how old do we feel today? You know what? I think I'm about 25 because we tend to think younger.
Yeah.
And that is actually a great thing as we age. So if it's something I'm seeing a lot of my clients, we do age differently. And I just want to, we're great at the divergent thinking. Like, give us a problem. We'll tell you 50 trillion ways, not all of them are good, to solve it.
Yeah.
In fact, some of them are going to be really, really dumb. Okay. But that's okay. We get points on creative for that one.
That's
So I
right.
do want to say, like, yeah, we're loads of deficits. But let me tell you, who brings the fun to the
Yeah.
party? So
That's right.
if you're lucky enough to have an ADHD person in your family, I can tell you, you should never be bored because we will make a game out of anything, a joke out of anything. We'll be creative. And so I just want to say, like, kind of put a word in for our people out there.
I love that.
Yes, we're a handful, but man, we could be lovable handfuls.
That is such a perfect way to end. Lovable handfuls. I'm going to
Yes.
quote that. Well, I really appreciate you making time. It's always so lovely to connect with you, and thank you so much again for your dedication.
Oh, it's such an honor to be here. I love the work you do. You do great work. So thank you.
Thank you.